The mining outpost of Grath Hollow was not a place where heroes were born. It was a place where people survived, barely, under the constant threat of unstable energy cores buried deep beneath the mountains. The sky above the outpost was always tinted a dull orange from the exhaust of extraction engines, and the ground trembled with a low, constant hum as machines drilled into the earth. Most workers kept their heads down, focused only on completing their shifts and earning enough credits to leave someday. But few ever did. Among them was a quiet human named Eric Hale, a maintenance technician responsible for stabilizing energy conduits and repairing broken shielding systems. He wasn't particularly strong, nor was he known for bravery, but he had something rare in Grath Hollow. He noticed things others ignored. On that fateful day, the alarms began as a faint, distant echo, barely audible over the grinding machinery. Eric was halfway through recalibrating a damaged conduit when the warning lights flickered red, signaling a critical overload deep within Sector 7. Most workers froze, uncertain whether it was a false alarm or another routine fluctuation, but Eric felt something was wrong. The vibrations beneath his feet were irregular, sharper, and more violent than usual. He dropped his tools and ran toward the source, ignoring shouted warnings behind him. The corridors twisted and narrowed as he moved deeper into the restricted sector, the air growing hotter and charged with unstable energy. Sparks crackled along the walls, and the hum of the core escalated into a deafening roar. When he reached the containment chamber, the sight stopped him cold. The energy core, a massive, pulsing structure of unstable crystal and molten light, was fracturing, cracks spreading like lightning across its surface. The containment field flickered erratically, seconds away from total collapse. But what caught Eric's attention wasn't just the imminent explosion. It was the small, trembling form near the edge of the chamber. A dragon hatchling, barely the size of a large dog, its scales shimmering faintly with iridescent hues, was trapped behind a collapsed support beam. Its wings were folded tightly against its body, its small form shaking as it let out weak, terrified chirps. Dragons were rare in Grath Hollow, often transported through the outpost as part of trade or research agreements, but hatchlings were never meant to be anywhere near the volatile core sectors. Somehow, this one had been left behind, forgotten, abandoned, or lost in the chaos of operations. Eric's mind raced. He could hear the countdown alarms intensifying, the system warning of a catastrophic detonation in less than a minute. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to run, to save himself. No one would blame him. No one would even know the hatchling had been there. But the sight of the small creature, trembling and alone, stirred something deep within him. "Hey, it's okay," Eric said softly, stepping closer despite the heat and the crackling energy around him. The hatchling looked up, its bright eyes wide with fear, and let out a faint chirp in response. Eric approached cautiously, careful not to startle it. Even as the chamber shook violently, he tried to lift the beam pinning the hatchling, but it was too heavy, reinforced by the collapsed structure. The countdown blared louder, 30 seconds. Sweat poured down his face as he strained against the metal, muscles screaming in protest. The hatchling whimpered, its tiny claws scraping weakly against the floor as it tried to free itself. Eric glanced at the core, now glowing brighter, its cracks widening, energy spilling out in violent bursts. He had seconds left. There was no time to move the beam completely, no time to escape. His mind made a decision before his fear could stop it. With a deep breath, he shifted his position, crouching over the hatchling and pulling it close against his chest. "I've got you," he whispered, wrapping his arms around it and shielding its small body with his own. The hatchling trembled against him, its warmth surprisingly strong, its heartbeat rapid but steady. Eric closed his eyes, bracing himself. The explosion came like a wave of fire and thunder. The containment field collapsed, and a surge of energy ripped through the chamber, tearing metal apart and sending shockwaves through the corridors. Eric felt the force slam into his back, a searing heat that stole the air from his lungs and sent pain cascading through his body. He held the hatchling tighter, instinct overriding everything else, his body absorbing the blast as best it could. For a moment, The world dissolved into light and noise, an overwhelming storm of destruction that threatened to consume everything in its path. And then, silence. Eric opened his eyes slowly, his ears ringing, his body aching with a dull, numbing pain. The chamber was in ruins, smoke and debris filling the air. But somehow he was still alive. More importantly, the hatchling in his arms stirred, letting out a soft, confused chirp. Eric looked down at it, relief flooding through him as he saw that it was unharmed. "You're okay," he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. The hatchling blinked up at him, its eyes filled not with fear now, but something else. Something deeper, something recognizing. Footsteps echoed through the wreckage as rescue teams rushed into the chamber, their expressions shifting from shock to disbelief as they took in the scene. A human, battered and burned, kneeling amidst the aftermath of an explosion that should have left nothing behind. And in his arms, a perfectly unharmed dragon hatchling. One of the rescuers whispered, "That's impossible." But the true shock came moments later. A deep, resonant roar echoed through the shattered corridors, powerful enough to silence every voice and freeze every movement. The air itself seemed to tremble as a massive shadow passed over the broken ceiling above. The rescuers looked up in terror as a colossal dragon descended through the smoke, its wings stretching wide, its scales gleaming like molten gold even in the dim light. Its eyes locked onto Eric and the hatchling in his arms, and for a moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Eric, barely conscious, could only watch as the great dragon lowered its massive head toward him. The hatchling in his arms chirped softly, reaching out toward the newcomer. The dragon's gaze softened, its immense presence radiating something far beyond power. Recognition, gratitude, and something ancient. No one spoke. No one dared to move, because in that moment, something had happened that no one in Grath Hollow had ever seen before. A human had shielded a dragon with his life, and the dragon had come to answer. Dragon. The air inside the shattered remains of Sector 7 felt impossibly heavy as the colossal golden dragon lowered itself into the wreckage, its massive wings folding with a thunderous hush that silenced even the crackling embers of the recent explosion. Every worker, every rescuer, every trembling observer instinctively stepped back, fear gripping them as ancient instinct screamed at them to flee. Yet none could move, not when those blazing, intelligent eyes were fixed solely on the injured human kneeling in the debris. Eric Hale could barely remain conscious, his vision blurred and body trembling from the impact of the blast. Yet he did not release the hatchling from his arms. The small dragon, no longer shaking in fear, instead pressed closer to him, its tiny claws gripping his scorched uniform as if refusing to let go. The great dragon's gaze flickered between them, the fragile human who had shielded its child, and the hatchling who now clung to him not out of fear, but trust. And something profound shifted in the ancient creature's presence. A low rumble echoed from deep within the dragon's chest, not a threat, but something far more complex, a sound layered with emotion that no human in Grath Hollow had ever heard before. The ground vibrated under its weight as it leaned closer, its massive head lowering until it was only a few feet from Eric. The rescuers held their breath, expecting fire, fury, or judgment, but none came. Instead, the dragon extended its neck slowly, carefully, and let out a soft exhale that washed over Eric and the hatchling like warm wind. The hatchling chirped in response, a high, joyful sound that cut through the tension, and nuzzled against Eric's chest before reaching toward the dragon. Eric, barely aware of the danger he was in, instinctively loosened his hold just enough for the hatchling to stretch forward. His arms trembled, but he did not pull back. The dragon's enormous eye focused on him, studying him with a depth of awareness that felt almost human. In that silent exchange, something passed between them. Not words, not commands, but recognition. The dragon understood what had happened. It understood the choice Eric had made, the moment he had placed his own life between the blast and its child without hesitation. And in that understanding, there was no anger, no suspicion, only something far rarer. Respect. The dragon lowered its head further, gently touching its snout to the hatchling, then pausing as if waiting. The The hatchling chirped again and shifted slightly in Eric's arms, pressing one small claw against his chest before leaning toward its parent. Eric carefully guided it forward, his movements slow and deliberate, and the hatchling stepped from his arms onto the dragon's massive snout. A collective breath escaped from the watching workers as the moment unfolded, fragile and surreal. The dragon lifted its head slightly, holding the hatchling with unimaginable care, then turned its gaze back to Eric. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, the injured human and the ancient dragon. Then, in a motion so unexpected that it stunned every witness into silence, the dragon lowered its head again, this time not for its child, but for Eric. Its snout hovered just inches from him, and then gently, carefully, it pressed against his shoulder. The contact was light, almost reverent, yet it carried a weight that no one present could fully comprehend. It was not a gesture of dominance or warning. It was acknowledgement. The rescuers stared in disbelief. Dragons did not bow to humans. They did not show gratitude in ways humans could understand. And yet, here it was undeniable. The dragon straightened slightly, releasing another low, resonant rumble that echoed through the ruined chamber. This time, the sound carried a different tone, one that seemed to resonate in the very bones of those who heard it, a declaration that needed no translation. The hatchling, perched safely on its parent's snout, chirped brightly, its earlier fear completely gone, replaced by an almost proud energy as it looked back at Eric. Medical personnel finally found the courage to move forward, approaching cautiously as they assessed Eric's injuries. His breathing was shallow, his body battered, but he was alive, against all logic, against all expectation. One of the medics whispered, "He shouldn't have survived that." But the words faded as the dragon shifted slightly, its gaze flicking toward them. There was no hostility in its eyes, but there was something unmistakable. A warning, a boundary. The medics slowed, careful not to make sudden movements, understanding instinctively that this moment belonged to something greater than their protocols. Eric, barely conscious, managed to lift his head slightly, his eyes meeting the dragon's once more. "It's safe now," he murmured weakly, his voice strained but sincere. "Your little one is safe." His words were simple, broken by pain, but they carried the same honesty that had driven him into the collapsing chamber. The dragon watched him intently, as if weighing every syllable, every intention behind those words. Then, slowly, it inclined its head again. Not as deeply as before, but enough to be unmistakable. Another rumble followed, softer this time, almost like a whisper of thunder fading into the distance. The hatchling chirped once more and, to the astonishment of everyone present, leapt lightly from its parent's snout back toward Eric, landing clumsily against his chest. Despite the medic's startled reactions, the dragon did not stop it. Instead, it watched, allowing the small creature to press itself against the human who had protected it. Eric's arms moved weakly, instinctively wrapping around the hatchling again, holding it close despite his injuries. The connection between them was undeniable now. Not just a moment of rescue, but something deeper, something lasting. Above them, the ruined ceiling opened to the sky, and more shadows began to pass overhead. Other dragons, drawn by the explosion and the presence of one of their own. They circled at a distance, watching, sensing the shift that had taken place below. The golden dragon remained still, its attention fixed on Eric and the hatchling, as if guarding them both. The workers of Grath Hollow, hardened by years of danger and survival, stood frozen in awe. They had witnessed explosions, disasters, and death countless times, but never something like this. Never a moment where a human's selfless act had been met not with indifference or hostility, but with recognition from a creature as ancient and powerful as a dragon. As the medics finally began to lift Eric onto a stretcher, moving slowly and carefully under the watchful gaze of the dragon, the hatchling refused to leave his side, clinging to him as if it had made its choice. The dragon watched this without interference, its massive form standing like a silent sentinel in the wreckage. And as Eric was carried away, barely conscious, one thought lingered in the minds of every witness. Something had changed. Not just in that chamber, not just in Grath Hollow, but in the very relationship between humans and dragons. Because a human had done the unthinkable. He had shielded a dragon hatchling with his life. And in return, he had been seen. Dragon. The medical wing of Grath Hollow had never felt so tense, nor so alive with whispers that carried equal parts fear and awe, as Eric Hale lay unconscious within a reinforced treatment chamber, his body wrapped in stabilization fields and advanced regenerative mesh, while just beyond the thick observation glass, a presence far greater than any machine loomed in absolute stillness. The golden dragon had not left. Hours had passed since the explosion, yet it remained perched atop the fractured remains of the outpost, its massive form visible through every external viewport, wings folded but ready, its gaze fixed unerringly on the structure where Eric was being treated. Workers who had spent their lives around danger now moved quietly, instinctively, as though afraid to disturb something sacred. No one had ordered silence, but it had settled over the entire outpost like a law no one dared to break. Inside the chamber, Eric's condition fluctuated between fragile stability and dangerous decline, his body struggling to recover from injuries no human should have survived. The medics worked tirelessly, applying treatments, recalibrating energy fields, and monitoring every sign of life. Yet even with all their technology, there was an unspoken understanding among them. He was alive because of something beyond science. Near his side, curled stubbornly against the medical restraints, the dragon hatchling refused to be separated from him. Despite multiple attempts by the staff to relocate it to a safer enclosure, the small creature reacted with distress each time, its chirps turning sharp and insistent until they relented. Now it lay pressed against Eric's side, its small body rising and falling in sync with his breathing, as if anchoring him to the world through sheer will. Occasionally, it would lift its head and emit a soft, melodic trill, a sound that seemed to ripple faintly through the air, resonating in ways no one could quite explain. The medical scanners registered unusual fluctuations each time it did, subtle stabilizations in Eric's vitals, minor but consistent improvements that defied conventional logic. The staff began to exchange uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe, because whatever was happening, it was working. Outside, the golden dragon shifted for the first time since its arrival, its enormous head lowering slightly as it exhaled a slow, controlled breath. The air itself seemed to shimmer as the exhale drifted toward the structure, brushing against the walls of the medical wing like an unseen current. Inside, the hatchling stirred immediately, lifting its head and responding with a soft chirp that echoed faintly with that same strange resonance. The monitors around Eric flickered, not failing but reacting, as if caught in a momentary overlap between technology and something older, something deeper. One of the senior medics stepped back, his voice barely above a whisper. This isn't just instinct. There's communication happening. No one argued because they could feel it too, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as if the space between the dragon outside and the hatchling within the room had become a bridge for something unseen. As the hours stretched on, word spread far beyond Grath Hollow. Communications were sent, reports filed, and within a short time, officials from distant systems began to take interest. Dragons were not merely creatures of power. They were ancient beings tied to histories, territories, and hierarchies that most humans barely understood. The presence of a golden dragon alone would have been enough to draw attention, but the circumstances, the rescue, the survival, the bond, made it something unprecedented. By the time night fell over the outpost, ships had begun to gather at a cautious distance, none daring to approach too closely, all observing the silent vigil of the dragon and the fragile life of the human within. Inside the chamber, Eric's condition began to change. At first, it was subtle, a steadier heartbeat, a more consistent rhythm in his breathing, but soon it became undeniable. His body, battered and burned, began to recover at a rate no one could explain. The regenerative mesh accelerated beyond its programmed limits, his cells responding with an unusual vitality that bordered on impossible. The hatchling remained pressed against him, its small form warm, its soft trills continuing at irregular intervals, each one accompanied by those same inexplicable fluctuations in the medical readings. It was as though the creature was doing more than staying close, it was helping him heal. Then, just before dawn, Eric moved. It was a small motion, barely noticeable at first. A twitch of his fingers, a faint shift in his breathing. But the room froze instantly as every eye turned toward him. The hatchling reacted immediately, lifting its head and chirping brightly, its wings fluttering with excitement. Slowly, painfully, Eric's eyes opened, his vision unfocused at first as he struggled to process the world around him. The bright lights, the hum of machines, the distant murmurs. It all felt distant, unreal. But then he felt it, the warmth against his side, the gentle pressure of something small and alive. He turned his head slightly, wincing at the effort, and saw the hatchling curled against him. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice rough and barely audible. The hatchling chirped in response, nudging closer, its eyes bright with something that looked remarkably like joy. Eric managed a faint smile, his hand lifting weakly to rest against its small back. "Guess. We both made it." The moment did not remain private for long. Outside, the golden dragon reacted instantly, its massive form shifting as it let out a deep, resonant roar that echoed across the entire outpost and into the surrounding skies. It was not a roar of anger or dominance. It was something else entirely, a sound that carried across vast distances, summoning attention, declaring something that none present could fully translate but all could feel. Ships in orbit adjusted their positions, distant dragons circling the region responded with answering calls, and within Grath Hollow, every worker, every observer, every official realized the same thing at once. This was not just survival. This was recognition. Inside the chamber, Eric struggled to sit up, supported quickly by the medics, his gaze shifting toward the observation window where the massive silhouette of the golden dragon loomed against the rising light of dawn. For a long moment, he simply stared, unsure whether what he was seeing was real or some lingering effect of his injuries. But when the dragon lowered its head slightly, its eyes locking onto his through the reinforced glass, there was no doubt. The connection was still there, just as strong as it had been in the shattered chamber of Sector 7. The hatchling chirped again, louder this time, and moved closer to Eric, as if encouraging him. He swallowed, his voice still weak but steady enough to speak. "Hey, big one," he murmured, the words simple, almost absurd given the situation, yet entirely sincere. "Your kids, doing all right?" For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the golden dragon exhaled slowly, the same shimmering breath brushing against the structure, and lowered its head just slightly, just enough to be unmistakable. Not a bow, not submission, but acknowledgement. And in that moment, every person watching understood something profound. The act of shielding that hatchling had not just saved a life. It had bound two worlds together in a way no one had ever seen before. Dragon. The dawn that rose over Grath Hollow was unlike any other the outpost had ever witnessed, because it did not belong to industry, nor survival, nor the endless grind of extraction. It belonged to something older, something sacred, something that had awakened in the space between a human and a dragon. As the golden light spread across the broken structures and drifting smoke, the massive dragon outside the medical wing shifted once more, but this time its movement carried purpose, not vigilance. The gathered ships in orbit held their distance, their crews silent observers to what was unfolding below, while the workers of the outpost stood in stillness, as if instinctively understanding they were about to witness something no history record had ever truly captured. Inside, Eric Hale, still weak but conscious, felt the change before he fully saw it. The hatchling at his side stirred, its small body suddenly alert, its bright eyes fixed toward the observation window. It let out a series of soft, urgent chirps, not fearful, not distressed, but calling. Eric followed its gaze, his breath catching as the golden dragon began to lower itself fully to the ground outside, its massive form settling with a controlled grace that shook the earth without breaking it. Then, slowly, deliberately, it began to approach the structure. Alarms threatened to trigger automatically, defense systems flickering uncertainly as ancient instincts clashed with programming, but none activated. Whether by chance or something deeper, the outpost did not resist. The dragon stopped just outside the reinforced wall of the medical chamber, its enormous head lowering until it was level with Eric's position. The glass between them, designed to withstand immense pressure, now felt impossibly fragile under the weight of that gaze. Inside the room, no one moved. The medics, the technicians, the observers, they all stepped back without being told, leaving only Eric and the hatchling at the center of the moment. The small dragon chirped again, more softly this time, and nudged Eric's arm as if urging him forward. With effort, he shifted, ignoring the protests of his still healing body, and swung his legs over the side of the bed. A medic started to object, but the words died in their throat when the golden dragon's eye flicked briefly in their direction. Not in threat, but in quiet command. Eric stood slowly, unsteady at first, but driven by something he didn't fully understand. Step by step, he moved toward the glass, the hatchling hopping down and padding alongside him, never leaving his side. When he reached the window, he stopped, staring up at the immense being before him. Up close, the dragon was even more overwhelming, its scales reflecting the rising sun like living gold, its eyes ancient beyond comprehension, yet focused on him with a clarity that felt deeply personal. Eric swallowed, unsure of what to say, unsure of what was expected of him. He was just a maintenance worker, someone who fixed broken conduits and kept systems running. He was not meant to stand before something like this. And yet, here he was. The dragon moved first. Slowly, it lifted one massive forelimb and extended it toward the structure. The reinforced wall did not shatter, did not resist. Instead, a faint glow spread across its surface, the material responding to an energy that was not destructive, but transformative. The glass seemed to soften, not breaking, but opening, forming a barrier that no longer separated but allowed passage. Gasps echoed through the room, but no one stepped forward. No one interfered. Eric felt it then. A pull, not physical, but something deeper, something that resonated within him. The hatchling chirped encouragingly and stepped forward first, crossing the threshold without hesitation. Eric hesitated only a moment longer before following. The air outside felt different, warmer, heavier, alive with a presence that made his skin tingle. He stood just a few feet from the dragon now, close enough to feel the heat radiating from its scales, close enough to see the subtle movements of its breath. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the dragon lowered its head once more, bringing its massive snout down until it was directly in front of Eric. The hatchling bounded forward, climbing easily onto its parent's snout before turning back toward Eric with an excited chirp. Eric let out a quiet breath, his fear replaced by a strange calm, and slowly raised his hand. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached out, but when they touched the dragon's scales, the reaction was immediate. A surge of warmth flowed through him. Not heat, not pain, but something deeper, something that seemed to move through his very being. His vision blurred for a moment, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming sensation of connection. Images flickered at the edge of his awareness. Not clear memories, but impressions. Vast skies, ancient mountains, the echo of countless voices carried across time. He staggered slightly, but did not pull his hand away. The dragon's eyes never left him. And then, in a gesture that would be remembered long after Grath Hollow itself turned to dust, the golden dragon bowed. Not slightly, not symbolically, fully. Its massive head lowered until it rested against the ground before Eric, its wings folding inward, its entire form shifting into a posture that no human had ever seen a dragon take before. A deep, resonant sound filled the air. Not a roar, not a growl, but something closer to a declaration. A vow spoken in a language older than any civilization. The hatchling chirped loudly, almost triumphantly, as if announcing what was happening to the world itself. Silence followed. Then, one by one, distant roars answered from the skies above. The dragons that had gathered, circling far beyond the outpost, began to descend. Not landing, not approaching directly, but lowering themselves in the air, their massive forms dipping in unison. Ships in orbit recorded the moment, their crews stunned into reverent silence as they witnessed something that defied every known hierarchy. Inside the outpost, people began to realize what they were seeing. This was not gratitude. This was not acknowledgement. This was honor. A kind of honor that dragons did not give lightly, a recognition so rare it had never been recorded in human history. Eric stood frozen, his hands still resting against the dragon's scales, his mind struggling to comprehend the weight of what was happening. I didn't do it for this," he whispered, his voice barely carrying across the space. "I just didn't want it to be alone." The dragon's eye shifted slightly, focusing on him with that same depth of understanding as before. It did not rise immediately. It remained bowed for a few seconds longer, as if ensuring the moment was fully realized, fully witnessed. Then, slowly, it lifted its head again, the golden light catching along its scales as it returned to its full height. The connection between them lingered, unbroken, something that would not fade even as the moment passed. The hatchling leapt back down, returning to Eric's side and pressing against him affectionately. Eric let out a soft, disbelieving laugh, his hand resting on its head. "Guess, you're not going anywhere, huh?" he murmured. The hatchling chirped happily in response. The dragon turned slightly, its wings beginning to unfurl as it prepared to leave. But before it did, it looked back at Eric one last time. No words were spoken, none were needed. The message was clear. He had not just saved a life. He had earned something no human had ever been given. And as the great dragon took to the skies, rising into the light of the new day, carrying its child yet leaving part of that bond behind, the people of Grath Hollow understood that they had witnessed the beginning of something that would echo far beyond their world. Because a human had chosen compassion over fear. And in return, the dragons had chosen to remember. Dragon,